Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. Today I will be walking you through an in-depth, thoroughly researched, no-nonsense explanation of the entire Dark Aether Zombies storyline. But it's a little different to other story recaps you might have seen before. I wanted to try and make it feel like you were listening to a story around a campfire. Just good vibes, a cup of hot chocolate, and me, your chirpy British friend who won't shut up about zombies. In terms of structure, we'll start off with the original Treyarch universe, but quickly zoom forwards into this new Dark Aether one because it's much more relevant today. That'll bring us into the events of Cold War, which sort of establishes and anchors us to key events in history. And once we've covered all of those, I'll walk you through exactly how Call of Duty Vanguard plugs into that framework. Believe me, we have a lot of ground to cover today. But before we do so, just 3 quick things here that I need to mention. First, I've added chapter markers to the video so you can watch this in sections if it's too long to get through the whole thing in one sitting. Second, I could have made this video about 4 hours longer, and if you enjoy what I've done here and you do want to see a bigger version in the future, let me know by simply dropping a like or leaving a comment. And finally, credits. I've hired writers, editors, animators, artists, and more for this project, as well as getting support from a lot of folks from my Discord and other community members, and I wanted to say thanks to all of those people for their contributions. I can only hope that all of the time, money, and sleepless nights spent on this will be worth it and you'll all enjoy the video. So, with all of that said, let's start with a trip down memory lane, shall we? Tracing our roots back to when the Zombies storyline began. I hope you've got your hot chocolate ready. Enjoy. It began long ago, on the battlefields of the Great War. The world was trapped in a never-ending conflict, and the people of Earth were doomed. The fate of humanity was sealed within an unending cycle, and all were cursed to repeat the same grim fates again and again. Within this never-ending loop, 4 heroes arose who fought back against the Scourge. At first, they simply perpetuated the conflict, and their resistance cost them deeply. But after countless failed attempts, against all odds, they prevailed, and the cycle was broken. Their final actions secured a better tomorrow, safe from the darkness and corruption that had festered in the world for so long. But, tragically, only 2 children were given the opportunity to see it. These children, Samantha Maxis and Eddie Richtofen, left their past universe behind and walked together, hand in hand, as the monsters who had tormented them were cast down into deepest darkness, never to trouble them again. It was March 7th, 1944, and World War II was raging on. Deep in a bunker in Morasko, Poland, German scientists who had the area occupied were preparing to activate a particle accelerator in hopes of making discoveries that could help their country win the war. The site, codenamed Project N Station, was being overseen by Dr. Ulrich Vogel, who was personally in charge of the usage of the facility's cyclotron. However, on that day, upon the activation of that cyclotron, the fate of our world was changed forever. Specifically, when the machine was powered on, our world and another world were bridged, creating a large dimensional breach in the center of the cyclotron chamber.
All the readings are within acceptable parameters. Looks like we are getting the collisions we expected and, some interesting patterns are starting to...
What was that?
I do not know. Gauges are redlining. We have to shut down.
My God! What is happening to the air around the collider?
You men! Get away from that!
Kurt! Cut the power!
I'm trying! Controls are not responding!
Kurt! Retreat! Seal those things in the chamber!
Despite their intent to cut the power and shut the collider down and seal those things in the chamber, they were too late and the dimensional breach remained open. Once the dust settled and they had control of the situation once more, they realized the opportunity this presented to them. Various experiments were initiated to try and understand this newfound dimension, as well as the mysterious chemical element that spilled from the breach. At the time, the German scientist called it Exo-Element 1. We now know it to be called Aetherium. Unbeknownst to the scientists at the site, the breach they had opened also had a totally unexpected impact on several ancient artifacts around the globe. Each of these artifacts had previously been tied to a corresponding elder god of great power within the Dark Aether. But without an open bridge to that dimension, the artifacts had remained inactive. Now that the breach was open though, their links were re-established, and it doesn't take much imagination to guess that these empowered objects could do great damage in the wrong hands. We'll circle back to this later, as it's absolutely crucial to understand the nature of those artifacts and the ancient gods, known as Old Ones, that they were all tied to. For now though, we're going to put this part of the conversation on pause, and we're going to return to the breach in Marasco. As World War II drew to a close, the Germans quickly lost the ground they held in Poland and fled the facility, and in the chaos of their escape, the cyclotron was left active. A few unlucky soldiers were left behind to fight against the hordes of undead that spilled from the breach, but eventually they too met their bitter end. As Soviet forces took back Poland, they passed through Marasco, and quickly realized they had to clean up the mess the Germans had left behind. One man was fatefully selected to shut down the collider and close the breach, and as he stepped into the facility to complete his mission, the Soviet army welded the door shut behind him, ensuring nothing more could escape its cursed halls. These secrets, however, would not remain buried. In November of 1984, dimensional breaches began to appear across the globe that shared strong similarities with the one that had been created at Marasco during the war. In response to these breaches, the CIA formed the Department of Requiem to try and better understand the situation and deal with any threat that it might pose. A director was appointed to lead the organization, having been transferred from another high-ranking position in a different branch of the CIA, and he, in turn, handpicked Gregory Weaver to assemble a strike team of field operatives. Weaver owed the CIA a favor after his escapades with Alex Mason, so he was thrilled to be given an opportunity to clear his name and show that he meant business. Not long after Requiem's formation, they received field intelligence which led them directly to that old Project End Station site in Poland. The site seemed like it may indeed be the source of all of these new dimensional breaches occurring worldwide, and this intel was sent by none other than Samantha Maxis, now much older and wiser than the child she had been a few decades prior. Weaver's strike team landed at the abandoned test facility in Marasco and began their investigations. They soon discovered that the Soviet equivalent of Requiem, called Omega Group, had recently been on site and reactivated the facility's cyclotron. With lists of names of supposed Omega volunteers scrawled on chalkboards inside the building, and many bodies strewn across those very same halls, it became clear that Omega's mission had not been without conflict and casualties. Descending underground into the bunker to restore facility power, Strike Team came across a distress signal recorded on an elaborate computer system inside. They attempted to respond, and in doing so made their first contact with an inhabitant of the Dark Aether. The man was trying to call for help, but could only communicate through text, and as his identity was unknown, for now, we will simply refer to this mysterious character as the Stranger. Once Strike Team had activated facility power once more, they were much better equipped to assess the situation around them. They realized that the large cyclotron in front of them was still active, and this was likely the cause of all those dimensional breaches that had appeared worldwide.
It's our lucky day, Strike Team. We have new orders from the Director. We are to shut down the dimensional breach in an effort to contain the spread.
The Strike Team found various strange energy signatures around the site that they called Dark Aether anomalies, and they used them to see visions of the past across the station. In doing so, they stumbled on the key to shutting the cyclotron down. A computer was still on site that once belonged to Ulrich Vogel, the lead scientist at Project Endstation. This computer controlled a machine designed to restore brain functionality to the undead, and Strike Team realized they could use this to try and find someone who might be capable of shutting the cyclotron down for them. To log into the computer and get that machine up and running, Strike Team found Dr. Vogel's journal and made a note of the password they found written inside. Next, they had to lure a suitable zombie into the machine to restore brain functionality too. They obviously wanted a candidate who had a good knowledge of the facility itself in the past, and they settled on a roaming boss zombie called the Megaton. With him trapped inside the chamber, they started the changing sequence. Orlov, the newly restored Megaton, began to panic and scream. He was terrified at his recovered sentience, having long since lost his humanity to Aetherium. But the Strike Team found a photo of his family and used it to calm him down. In doing so, they learned Orlov's story from visions of his past self.
My Sanya, little Katya, I know you cannot hear me, but I must ask you, give me strength. Omega Group has given me my orders. I am to restart that infernal machine. In this, I have no say. It is my duty. When it is reactivated, I do not know what will happen. That information is considered very much above my rank, but considering the precautions the others now take, I must face the possibility that I may never see you again. I hope this is not true. I hope that nothing will change, that the world will stay as it is. But I fear I am opening a box that cannot be closed. I will see you both again.
Orlov was one of the men that Omega Group had forced to volunteer to reactivate the cyclotron at Project Endstation. These men went in fully aware that turning on the machinery would cause their death, but they followed their orders regardless. And just before he did so, Orlov spent his final moments thinking of his family.
These faces are familiar to me. I knew them once. Years past. They were my Simya, my family. I came here to this cursed land to do a job. Amiga, they had me. Yet they made me turn on this machine of the damned. It caused horrible things. I caused horrible things. Omega Group, they have big plans. You are here to stop them. I will help you. We will shut off this infernal machine. Close the gateway. It will be the first step. I will repair the damage I have done.
With Orlov now soothed and willing to help right the wrongs of Omega Group's past actions, the Strike Team successfully disabled the machine. Orlov, still a monster, decided to stay behind. He would activate a nuclear bomb left in the facility and ensure Project Endstation's permanent destruction. Before they made their escape, though, Orlov one final time reflected on his family.
If someday you meet my Sanya and Katya, tell them I will see them both again.
Weevil was hopeful to see Maxis in the field once Strike Team had completed their mission that they had based on her intel. However, she was nowhere to be found. Instead, she was focused on a new objective. Maxis was on her way to meet face-to-face with someone who had contacted her from within the Omega Group. This contact wanted to meet in person as they had become disillusioned with Omega Group's activities and wanted to help stop them. They requested Maxis meet them at Omega Group Outpost 25, a previously abandoned military firebase in Khe Sanh, Vietnam. Maxis traveled to meet the Omega contact, whose name was Sergei Ravanov. Ravanov was an elite soldier before he joined Omega Group. However, he quickly became horrified after seeing their horrible experiments in action, and his loyalty finally broke when he was forced to cover up deaths at the hand of his Omega Group superior, Alexandra Valentina. As a result, he had reached out to Maxis about the situation, and there she now was, making her way towards the outpost. Just before Maxis entered the outpost, she made a call to Weaver, informing him that she was okay and that even though she broke his orders to enter CIA protection after Strike Team finished their work in Morasco, he needed not worry about her. After all, she was capable of protecting herself.
Are you still angry, Weaver?
I'm rarely angry, Sam. You should know that.
No, I know that you're just very good at hiding it. I have news.
Tell me what's going on, and please, Sam, don't lie. That would make me angry.
I have a contact with an Omega Group. He's the real deal. There's an Omega operation underway at a facility about halfway between Hue City and Kaisan, headed up by one of their top scientists, Dr. William Peck. You heard that name before?
I know the name all too well. He may have a brilliant intellect, but he's an arrogant narcissist who cares only for stoking his own ego. Above all else, he's a fucking traitor to this country.
I know. But this Peck is also about to help the Soviets secure the breakthrough they need to control access to the other dimension.
Okay, let's assume your intel is solid, and this is all true. You have to let Requiem take it from here.
This could be our only chance to catch up with the Soviets. I'm going to meet with my contact.
Sam, I don't want you to get yourself hurt.
Please don't be angry, Weaver.
Damn it, Sam.
Unfortunately for Maxis, her phone was tapped when she made that call, which caused her whereabouts to be discovered by Omega Group. This resulted in Maxis being captured and interrogated by Omega's Dr. William Peck. Peck was an American defector now working for the Soviets, and he headed Omega's Exoscientific Phenomena Research Department. The focus of Peck's interrogation of Maxis was to try and determine who in Omega had reached out to her in the first place. He grew frustrated at Samantha's stubborn refusal to answer his questions, and after a discussion with one of his contacts, he decided to throw her into the Dark Aether to be rid of her for good. Soon after, Ravenov contacted Weaver to inform him of the situation at Outpost 25.
Is this a secure line?
As secure as they can be.
You're wrong. They're listening. They always are. That's why Maxis is where she is now.
You're the contact she told me about. Where is Samantha now?
When I arrived at the meeting, they were already there. Omega. They took her.
Did they hurt her?
They will keep her alive. At least, for now. They will have taken her to their facility. The one where you must go. Where you must send your people.
Who are you to tell me what I should do?
I am Sergei Ravenov. I know you need Peck's research. I know you need to close the gap. I know you know how quickly you are falling behind. Their Aetherium research is way beyond yours. Way beyond anything you could imagine. Maxis would want you to stop them weaponizing it further, even if it meant she sacrifices herself for the greater good.
If you're lying to me, if you betrayed her, if any harm comes to her, I will kill you myself.
In response to finding out about Maxis' capture, Weaver sent in the strike team. They met up with Ravenov in a local village which had teleporter links to the Firebase outpost. This teleporter was needed to circumvent the ethereal phase barrier which surrounded Outpost 25. Phase barriers like this, often referred to as the phase by Omega scientists, removed oxygen from an area and replaced it with Aetherium. No one who had entered the phase had ever returned, so Strike Team had no other option but to teleport in instead. It was there that the team had their first run-in with Dr. Peck. He offered Requiem a deal and promised to hand Maxis back over into their custody in exchange for the restoration of the facility's power. However, true to character as a defector, Peck broke his promise and betrayed the Strike Team as soon as they did what he asked. He revealed that Samantha was still trapped inside the Dark Aether and that he simply wanted power restored in order to let him transmit his research work back to Omega HQ. Requiem knew they had to find a way to make him talk, and fast. Thinking on their toes, the team gathered the requisite ingredients to concoct an Omega Truth Serum. This serum was invented by Dr. Peck and used Aetherium as a gas to make the subject experience vivid hallucinations of their memories. Omega had previously used this to extract memories from their soldiers who they had sent into the Dark Aether to mine Aetherium, but who had subsequently lost their minds. So, Weaver and the strike team decided to use it to make Dr. Peck reveal how they could save Maxis.
Hallucinations. Memories. My memories. I see. Is that? I believe it is. The meaning of life. To dance.
All right, Peck. You've had your fun. Now, how do we open the portal? Tell us the truth.
1, 2, 3. The truth. The truth is that you interrupted a lovely waltz with my Martha. But, the portal, you'll need the codes to restart the quantum mainframe. Dr. Sokolov and Brahms have them. But to locate Maxis, you'll need her dimensional tracker ID tag. Sabine has that. Oh, yeah. They're all dead. Or infected. Head to the data center. There may be something that can help you.
While carrying out Peck's new recommendations for how to open the portal, Strike Team again stumbled on an elaborate Dark Aether computer, just like the one at Project End Station. This allowed them to continue their communication with the Stranger. Despite the mystery of his identity, they found themselves paying increasingly close attention to the experiences he shared and tales he told of life inside the Dark Aether. After securing the intel that Peck said would be necessary to bring Samantha back from that other world, Peck revealed that he had one last surprise in store for the strike team. His final instruction was almost another trick and caused the strike team to overload the power at the facility, which closed the gateway they had been trying so hard to open. This seemingly foiled Requiem's plans to bring Sam home. It was at this point that Requiem HQ stepped in and suggested they might be able to help by repurposing one of the director's side projects made up of a satellite-guided Aetherium laser which could pierce the Dark Aether and pull out specific targets. Firing this laser at Outpost 25's satellite dish gave the facility enough power to once again open a gateway, and this time Samantha was successfully extracted. Strike Team began an exfil, only to be stopped by a powerful Dark Aether creature.
Are you fucking kidding me?
The strike team successfully destroyed the creature and escaped the village with Maxis and Ravenov in tow. Ravenov, however, split from the group here, as he believed Omega were beginning to undertake operations in the Ural Mountains and thought it best that he head there too. Maxis smiled and told Weaver they had much to talk about, as Raptor 1 picked her and the strike team up for a ride back to base. Okay, quick check-in. Are you still with me? You're still following this? Things are still okay? Good. Let's take a quick break here from the operations for a moment and talk about the shifting tone of the Cold War during this era. As Maxis relayed more and more information to Requiem, it became increasingly clear that Omega Group had a much better understanding of Aetherium than they did. What was effectively a brand new field of science had sprung up revolving around the element and its uses. And this quest for knowledge was fueled by the Cold War, with both global superpowers hungry for some ethereal advantage over their adversaries. Thus, this period of technological research and development would come to be known as the Aetherium Arms Race. Very much in the spirit of this newfound Aetherium Arms Race, Requiem began sending Strike Team in to a handful of key sites within a supersized outbreak region in the Ural Mountains, in order to carry out tasks for their various research divisions. Maxis, now back at Requiem, eagerly requested to be allowed into the field to assist with the fight against Omega. Unfortunately for her, a vote of confidence was held to decide if she should be allowed back into the field, and it failed to pass by 1 vote. She was instead denied release and held in Requiem HQ's hospital. Maxis was devastated by this, but wouldn't let this setback stop her entirely. Unbeknownst to the Requiem department leads, she contacted Strike Team during one of their research outings through a radio and pleaded for their help. She wanted them to take on a mission for her and to keep it hidden from Weaver and the rest of Requiem. Her goal was to find a hidden message, known as a dead drop, that Ravenov had left for her somewhere in the Ural Mountains and use the information it contained to keep helping fight back against Omega.
It's been a while. Still out in the field? You're lucky. I'm under lock and key. At Requiem, they may be listening. They're always listening. Take the device to the beacon. I will tell you more when I can. Requiem. We have a secure line. I need your help. Ravenov. He's in the Ural Mountains right now. He found something. I need you to find him.
Once they discovered the dead drop, the team opened it up to find film slides inside which showed shocking images of Omega construction plans for giant Aetherium missiles. These missiles were being developed by Dr. Peck in a silo somewhere underneath Ruka in the Ural Mountains. They would have the ability to create an ethereal outbreak zone anywhere they landed, and the ominous name that Peck coined for these new inventions of his was Inversion warheads. It was for this reason that Omega named this operation Operatia Inversia.
The electromagnetic interference generated from the tempests would mean the West could never see it coming. No preemptive response. No mutually assured destruction. The course of history could change overnight.
Hoping to prevent the missiles from ever being used in an act of war, Maxis sent the strike team to meet up with Ravenov in Ruka. Once they arrived at the Ruka missile silos, the strike team followed a trail of Omega corpses to an opened elevator. They rode downwards into the silo in hopes of rendezvousing with Ravenov, but were held up because the facility was in lockdown. They looked around for a way to turn the lockdown off and found Ravenov in hand-to-hand combat with the last remaining Omega forces at the facility.
Requiem! Where is Maxis?
I'm here, still being held by Requiem. They don't want me in the field.
Maxis and Ravenov decided that while they had the chance, they and Strike Team should launch the Inversion warheads to prevent Omega from ever being able to do so. They picked a remote, empty-seeming location in the Pacific Ocean to send them to, and activated the launch sequence. As they did so, though, a legion of Tempests swarmed the facility and ended up preventing the missile launch pads from being able to freely fire. Once the creatures fell, the warheads were successfully launched towards the Pacific, and Raptor 1 arrived to take Strike Team back to base. Once they arrived home, the director had Maxis moved to a new facility known as Block 8. This was done for two reasons. One, to punish Maxis for her unauthorized activity and cut her contact with the outside world, and two, to begin doing tests on her to better understand her new Dark Aether powers, which had begun to manifest since she left the Dark Aether. The tests were also designed to cultivate those powers even further.
What's happening?
Garcia Anderson. Secure her.
Hey! Take your hands off me! Weaver! Call them off!
You're to undergo some additional testing. Don't make this any harder than it already is.
Why are you doing this?
I'm not. Orders from the director. It's okay, girl. I'll look after you.
Weaver! Maxis, stop!
I can't, Sam. My hands are tied.
Weaver!
As Requiem research in the Ural Mountains continued, Weaver was contacted by Ravenov. He informed Weaver that a group of Omega scientists were willing to defect from their positions, and they wanted to join Requiem. Weaver sent the strike team to meet Ravenov at the sanatorium and assist in the exfil of those scientists. However, when the strike team arrived, they found them all already dead. They had fallen for a masterful trap set by Omega Group. It turned out that an Omega scientist called Dr. Yeager had faked his willingness to betray his colleagues in order to snuff out the real traitor's escape attempt and to capture Strike Team in one fell swoop.
Hello, Requiem. So glad you could make it. enjoying my handiwork. Do not worry, they did not go quietly. Dr. Zarkova, she put up quite a struggle. It was almost honorable. But there is no honor in betraying Omega. It is a despicable act of cowardice. When Kravchenko learned of the plot to defect, I could not volunteer fast enough. Once I infiltrated their group, the Colonel gave me 2 tasks. 1, kill the traitors. Easy enough. Nothing a hacksaw and a gas can could not solve. But the second, to lure Requiem's so-called elite strike team into a trap. That added a complication. But fortunately, crashing helicopters is easy once you've poisoned the pilot. Soon we will change the world, Requiem. Auf Wiedersehen.
Fending off hordes of zombies, they attempted to exfil, but were shot down by Omega's fierce leader, the one and only Lev Kravchenko. Kravchenko was all too familiar to Weaver. He was the former right-hand man to Dragovich, disavowed by the Kremlin since the disaster at the Lubyanka building, and also happened to be the man who had previously taken Weaver's eye. So, with Strike Team and their pilot reeling from their chopper having been shot down, Kravchenko took them into his custody effectively as POWs, to decide what to do with them at a later date. This might seem dire for Requiem, their strike team imprisoned, but things weren't going so smoothly internally at Omega Group either. Deep in the midst of torture and interrogation of Raptor 1 and Strike Team, Kravchenko noticed that something was off in Omega, namely that Dr. Alexandra Valentina had been missing for some time. This was unsettling to Kravchenko, as she was supposed to be the head of psychotronics research for the organization, and was crucial to their plans going forwards. Soon after, an outbreak zone appeared at the Berlin Wall, and Kravchenko quickly took notice, immediately connecting the dots and recognizing Valentina must have been the one responsible for this. He decided to make use of his new hostages, and keeping Raptor 1 in his custody, he sent the strike team into Berlin to carry out a mission for him. They must close the gateway that was creating the outbreak zone and kill or capture Valentina. If they failed, he would execute Raptor 1. Simple. Kravchenko airlifted Strike Team into Berlin, and the hunt for Valentina began. Exploring the subway system of the city, Strike Team found and opened the entrance to a hidden bunker, a second Project End Station facility prepared for use long ago but left dormant since the war. As they explored this bunker, Peck interjected with a plan. Use the technology left behind to build a makeshift inversion warhead and set it off within the Dark Aether in order to close the gateway from the other side. Strike Team got to work on this. After all, they had to follow Omega's orders if they wanted their pilot to survive. Just as the team completed the warhead, Valentina started to speak to Omega and the Strike Team from within the Dark Aether. Her motivations became crystal clear. She was actually the daughter of Project End Station's Dr. Ulrich Vogel, and she was dead set on completing his life's work. She explained that when the cyclotron had powered on that final time during World War II, Vogel had facilitated the escape of an army of German soldiers into the Dark Aether. Their plan was to survive there through the end of the war and then return at a later date. Now, that very army was marching towards Valentina's portal into Berlin, and they were intent on continuing right where they left off and ensuring global German rule.
My name is Angelika Hannibal Vogel, daughter of Ulrich Vogel. I am here to complete his mission. The dawn of the new Reich begins now!
Valentina, however, had been tricked. Her father was not the one leading this Dark Aether army. It was something far more dangerous and far darker.
In truth, it is a Dark Aether entity known as the Forsaken. It can shift its form, manipulating others, and right now, it wants to get into our world. If the Forsaken were to get into our world, it would destroy us. My inversion warheads were meant to stop it.
Strike Team narrowly managed to defeat Valentina, making use of help from a friendly Requiem robot called Klaus that they found on site. After her defeat, Klaus carried the warhead they had built into the gateway for the strike team and detonated it there. The world's newly revealed enemy, called the Forsaken, warned that he would return soon, but as he did so, the gateway was successfully sealed shut. The world was safe, for now.
Closing this portal will not stop me. I convinced the girl I was her father with ease. I will find another conduit. We are not finished. Your world will be mine.
Kravchenko returned Raptor 1 to Strike Team in an effort to lure them out into the open so he could gun them down. But they managed to evade his murderous efforts by exiting the area through a purple portal that appeared just in time. They were greeted on the other side by none other than Samantha Maxis herself. Eyes glowing brightly, it was now clear that Sam's control over her powers was growing rapidly, even if using them was still extremely exhausting for her. As these events unfolded, the director observed everything from his office. He made note of the fact that Sam's blossoming abilities would become an issue in the future for one of his most secret projects, codenamed Project Janus. We'll come back to that later on. While Strike Team recovered from their activities in Berlin, the Stranger once again contacted Requiem and also made contact with Omega. He revealed his identity to both groups. The Stranger was actually the same man that the Soviets had sent into the particle accelerator facility to shut down the cyclotron all those years ago, and his name was Kazimir Zykov. At the time, he had actually gone into the Dark Aether breach to try and close it from the other side and save the world, but had since been unable to return. Zykov warned of the dangers of the Forsaken and made a promise to Requiem. If they could extract him from the Dark Aether, he would return the favor by helping them defeat the Forsaken. However, if Omega got him out first, he would instead join forces with them.
Hello again, my friend. It is your old comrade Zykov. And yes, we are still comrades, even if you now serve Omega Group. This secret war we fight, and the ultimate enemy we both face, transcend the politics of East and West. And now, thanks to Dr. Valentina, we have entered a dangerous new phase. She thinks she is carrying out her father's wishes, but she is wrong. The being that has visited her since childhood is not her father. The Forsaken is not simply powerful. He is a master of deceit. I have seen him do this before. Alter his appearance, play upon emotions, all to make others do his bidding. I have seen others here become drawn to him, follow him, worship him. And now the Forsaken commands a vast army, hungrily eyeing our world. This is the nature of the great evil I have been warning you about. This dark universe is no longer enough for him. He lives to consume. And when you reopened the gateway at End Station, he looked upon our world and saw a banquet to be devoured. I can still help you stop him, but only if you free me from this place. Only if you bring me home.
Ravenov once again got in touch with Requiem to discuss the unfolding situation.
Omega, Operacja Izbavitel. I know what it is. More importantly, I know where. There is a test site, used in the early days of Operacja Inversia. It has been repurposed. A courier will be delivering a parcel to Requiem's dead drop in Madrid. Review the documents. Then we talk.
And in return, what do you get out of all this? Your name cleared? Safe passage to the west?
Niet. I want you to release Agent Maxis.
I'll see what I can do.
Ravenov warned that Omega were using a facility in the Ukraine to attempt to rescue Kazimir Zykov, and that they then intended to capture the Forsaken and use its powers as a weapon against the West. A machine had been constructed on site to penetrate deep into the Dark Aether to pull their targets out, as the location where they resided would otherwise be almost impossible to reach through traditional methods. The director verified this information given by Ravenov and ordered Weaver to send the strike team in. Samantha generated a portal to get them into the site faster and without Omega Group noticing, making use of all those powers that she now had even better control over. Once strike team were in, Weaver had ordered her to stand down and sit out the rest of the conflict, but she knew in her heart that when the time came, she would have to act against his wishes. For now though, she held back. Requiem stepped out of Sam's portal and arrived at the Ukrainian facility, alternatively known as Test Site Anna. A large Dark Aether storm loomed overhead in the inky black sky. They teleported inside and found that Kravchenko and Peck were already in the observation tower and preparing to pull Zykov from the Dark Aether. Just as the strike team stormed the observation tower, Kravchenko and Peck succeeded in their mission, locating their first target deep inside the Dark Aether and opening the portal to allow Zykov to pass through.
You did it! You brought me home! I have long awaited this day to take what is mine.
40 Earth years, 4 Dark Aether centuries, abandoned, trapped, left to die. But I endured. I fought. I consumed. I evolved. You trusted me and did as I asked. You built the machine that could bring me back. The Dark Aether shall consume your world. This realm is mine.
Colonel, you have to believe me. I didn't realize he was the creature.
You fucking fool. The wolf was at our door and you let him in. You have doomed us all.
All is not lost. Not yet.
Sam, what are you doing?
What I have to do, Weaver. For the good of us all. This is not your world to take!
Now, the game had changed. The Forsaken had fooled both sides. All along, it and Zykov were actually one and the same being. Zykov had originally entered the Dark Aether back during the war as a hopeful martyr, willing to sacrifice himself in order to bring peace to the world and end the war. As decades and decades passed inside the Dark Aether, mere years were passing in our world. Time passes slower there, and during that time, Zykov observed the Cold War heating up, and it became clear to him that such a peace that he had been striving for would never be achieved. His sacrifice had been in vain all along. He resented the greed of both nations involved, and his festering hatred drove him to give in to the darkness surrounding him. This inescapable rage and resentment fueled his transformation over time, with elements of the Dark Aether and Aetherium intertwining with and supercharging his very being. Using this new power, he methodically absorbed or enslaved many of the most powerful entities of the Dark Aether. This conquest included several of the old ones that we previously mentioned were tied to the ethereal artifacts which reactivated when the Marasco breach was opened during the war. Zykov's consumption of those old ones was the final catalyst for his transformation into the Forsaken. We'll talk in more depth about those mysterious beings in a few minutes, but for now, just know this. Absorbing them set a precedent for Zykov to make himself similar to and be able to emulate others. and also meant that this being he had transformed into over time had gained great power. Back inside the observation tower, Peck and Kravchenko's office was broken into and quickly overrun with zombies, forcing them to fight for their lives. This did not go well.
Colonel, they're breaking through!
You idiot! Watch where you're shooting! The gas line!
Meanwhile, Maxis was doing her best to keep the Forsaken occupied while Strike Team fought their way through the streets of Test Site Anna to reach her. Upon their arrival, they realized that Omega had left 3 key pieces of equipment in front of the portal that they had opened to rescue Zykov. One was an enormous metal containment chamber, and the other 2 were a pair of Aetherium turrets. Omega had intended to use the turrets to subdue the Forsaken once they pulled it through the portal after Zykov, planning to then trap it inside the containment chamber to transport it elsewhere and save for a rainy day in the future. This served as a perfect opportunity for Requiem to commandeer that Omega tech and use it for themselves. With Strike Team's help, Sam used her powers to charge the Aetherium turrets. They fired them again and again at the Forsaken, and just as they destroyed its head, and victory felt close at hand, the Forsaken dropped huge crystal pylons down from the Dark Aether gateway hanging in the sky above them. Strike Team were dazed and confused, which left Maxis standing alone as humanity's final hope.
You will not consume this world! Not as long as I am here!
Sam, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't do it!
I'm not a bad person, Weaver. I am a good soul. I know what I have to do. I'm sorry. This is the only way.
Samantha's sacrifice was the only possible action that Requiem could have taken to assure that the Forsaken was successfully subdued and could be sucked into the containment chamber. In doing so, she was forced to fling herself back into the far reaches of the Dark Aether, destroying any means of returning and locking herself especially deep inside the confines of that nightmare dimension that cruelly mirrors our own. Requiem were victorious, but at what cost? Across the world, the active outbreak zones collapsed once the Forsaken had been subdued. Weaver, watching on his monitor, thanked Sam one last time. Helicopters flew in to collect the containment device holding the Forsaken and to exfil the Strike Team. The Forsaken, still inside Peck's containment device, was taken to a secure location, now held in the possession of the Director. Shortly afterwards, all of Strike Team and all of the Requiem department leads were arrested by military police to be sent back to a CIA black site and interned indefinitely. They had been witness to events that simply could not be allowed to get out into the public, and the risk of allowing them to stand as free citizens was simply too great. Or at least, that's one way to justify it. In actuality, a much more sinister power dynamic was being established here, with 3 key parties at the very top of the food chain. One was the Director himself. Another, the executive branch of the United States government, i.e. the presidential branch. The last, a highly secretive cabal of shareholders who were also invested in the work of this collective group. Now that Maxis was locked in the Dark Aether, their mysterious Project Janus could finally move forward. And as the capture of the Forsaken was a key aspect of that project, it seemed that now there was nothing standing in their way for them to proceed with their clandestine plans. The Director watched the confirmation reports that the team had all been arrested, and satisfied, he stood up to leave his office. He paused for a moment at his door. His desk told the tale of a respectable man, a photo of a wife and young son, and a portrait of himself as a pilot. Glancing back into the room though, his face told a very different story. He was no measly CIA official, no feckless suit, no straight-edge government pawn. No, he was the one and only Eddie Richtofen, the other child that had walked out of the previous doomed universe side by side with Sam at the end of the Aether Storyline. He clearly had big plans, as Richtofens always do, and they were going swimmingly. 5 years later in Japan, Dr. Peck reappeared, having been moving around in secrecy for some time now. With horrible scarring across his face from the gas line explosion in the observation tower half a decade prior, he made contact with a local fisherman.
I need to rent a boat. Where do you need to go? Here. Are you sure? There's nothing there. What is it you're looking for?
The location that Peck indicates here seemingly lines up with the coordinates that Requiem sent the Inversion warheads towards back during their mission in Ruka 5 years ago. It's also very close to the real-life location of Zetsubou no Shima, so despite the fisherman saying there's nothing there, it seems that that part of the world is actually pretty busy after all. The exact details of Peck's plan, however, are a mystery for another day. The events we've covered so far give us a baseline, framework, and timeline which Vanguard Zombies slots into very neatly, especially the parts relating to the Forsaken, Elder Gods, and Old Ones. To illustrate these connections, let's return to the Second World War one more time. The year was 1943, and Germany had just faced a brutal defeat to the Allies in the Battle of Stalingrad. The war had started in promising fashion for the Germans, but as time went on and their defeats stacked up, they were driven to search for other methods by which they might gain an advantage over their enemies. One of these plans will now already be familiar to you. It was the building of a particle accelerator in Morasko, Poland, which kicked off the events of Cold War that we've already explored. Another plan, though, that we haven't covered yet was led by a formidable senior German army official called Wolfram von List. Von List was tasked to command a division of the German army called Die Wahrheit, which translates to the truth. This group focused on studying the occult, and they started work by forcing several historians, explorers, and scientists around the world to help them. One of these unlucky souls was called Gabriel Kraft, who was a professor of demonology with a deep understanding of the occult, and as such, he was a very valuable asset to Die Wahrheit's mission. In the months that followed the German defeat at Stalingrad, Kraft used his expert knowledge to help von List to locate key mystical items around the globe that he thought might carry occult power or significance. Several digging expeditions were undertaken in Mexico, Egypt, and elsewhere, and on these digs they found evidence of mysterious runes that proved to the Germans that they were looking in the right direction. Eventually, this led to the uncovery of 5 ancient artifacts. Now, as we previously discussed, these artifacts had been dormant for a long time at this point, and were of little use to their owners in that state. It's here, though, that our two storylines, Cold War and Vanguard, begin to overlap with one another. We already know that in March 1944, when the Project Endstation cyclotron was turned on by Dr. Vogel and his team, the collider punched a hole through the dimensional veil. In doing so, it created an anomaly within the chamber, and the Germans started experimenting on it. That's all stuff that we've discussed. What I haven't mentioned until now is that when the dimensional veil became punctured in that way, it also allowed those 5 dormant artifacts to re-establish their connection with the Dark Aether. They were no longer dormant. Each of these 5 artifacts was tied to an extremely powerful entity of the Dark Aether. The names of these so-called Old Ones are as follows: Cortifex the Deathless, former Lord of the Dark Aether; Nauticus the Conqueror, who once led Cortifex's armies in the Dark Aether, although they then became sworn enemies; Syraxis the Shadow, a witty, wicked trickster who saw humans as playthings; Belikar the Warlock, a master of Dark Aether runic magic who was fascinated by humans and their warlike ways; and Invicta the Destroyer, the ultimate frontline fighter who was at home in the thick of battle and always out for blood. Anyone who touched an active artifact of this nature would form a symbiotic bond with its corresponding entity. This would allow the entity to give guidance to the artifact holder, whispering tempting suggestions into their ears. This symbiosis also provided Dark Aether powers to those who possessed the artifacts and bonded with the entities. So the holder of the Horn of Nauticus could create a Frost Blast. The The Dragon of Syraxis allowed manifestation of an energy mine. The Mask of Belikar could create an ethereal shroud, and the Sword of Invicta could engulf the surrounding area in purple ethereal flames. However, it was Kortifex who Wolfram von List decided to bond with, and in doing so, Kortifex granted him the power to raise the dead to do his bidding. His plan from that point on was simple. It was pretty obvious. He would raise an army of dead soldiers that Germany had lost in the fighting at Stalingrad a year prior, and he would then sweep across Europe to decisively defeat the Allies once and for all. Now remember, at this point in the Cold War story, the Germans had only just created the anomaly in Marasco, so they hadn't evacuated the facility just yet, the Russians hadn't arrived to clean up the mess, and Zykov hadn't been sealed inside the Dark Aether while trying to fix everything. This meant that initially, in Vanguard Zombies, in the timeline of things, the Forsaken wasn't really a threat, because it took a few years at minimum in our world, equivalent to a few decades in the Dark Aether, for Zykov to start absorbing the old ones around him in order to gain power and transform. These events all slowly unfolded as the rest of the war played out and several years after it passed too. And so that means that we always kind of knew where we were going in Vanguard Zombies. We had this backdrop, this structure that the game was plugging into, but it was always going to kind of point in one direction as time passed. With enough time, those Elder Gods would be absorbed by Zykov, and in many ways enslaved by him as well, and this would have its own ramifications for stuff going on within the Dark Aether, and would then of course lead to Zykov being super powerful in Cold War. However, the details of that are something we'll discuss another day, and we'll also talk about Sporagmos in there too. If you're interested in that content, make sure to subscribe. So, Von List had an evil plan now, as he'd bonded with Kortifex, and he might have gotten away with that plan too if Gabriel Kraft hadn't been able to alert the Vanguard Special Forces to the situation. It was Kraft's distress signal that told them to head to Stalingrad, and they did so and established a forward operating base within the city. They also managed to end up in possession of the other 4 ethereal artifacts, and were therefore able to bond with those 4 remaining Dark Aether entities to help them on their way. However, they weren't destined to have an easy time. Kortifex used his ethereal powers to seal their forward operating base off from the rest of the world, preventing them from calling for further reinforcements and leaving them with only these 4 Elder Gods in their heads and the voice of Gabriel Kraft ringing in their ears. They had to figure out how to break free of Kortifex's grasp and stop Von List before he completed his dastardly mission. Alongside, the Elder Gods had their own plans that they kept secret at first, but that would manifest in time. And that is exactly what happened in Der Anfang.